I, 32 male, thought my wife's, 30 female, extra shifts were for our dream house. I just found out she's been funding her boyfriend's lifestyle with our savings. Hey Reddit, I'm typing this from a motel room, and honestly, my hands won't stop shaking. I just need to get this out before I lose my mind. To give you some context, my wife, Elena, ID number E01, and I have been married for 6 years. We were that perfect couple, the ones our friends used as a benchmark for stability. We were saving up for a farmhouse in the countryside. We even had the floor plans pinned to our fridge. Elena is a nurse, or so I thought, and for the last 8 months, she's been picking up grueling double shifts. The signs were there, but I was blinded by gratitude. I'd come home to a quiet house, the smell of her lavender candles still lingering, but the bed was cold. She'd come home exhausted, barely able to look me in the eye, citing burnout. I stepped up. I did all the cooking, the cleaning, and looked after our younger brother, Leo, ID number 01, and our dog, Bento, ID number B01, so she could rest. The first real red flag was the sensory stuff. You know how you just know someone's scent? She started smelling like expensive sandalwood cologne, not her usual clinical antiseptic and vanilla. Then there was the phone. She'd never had a passcode before, but suddenly it was like she was guarding a state secret. She'd jump if I even moved it to wipe the table. The sudden event that broke everything happened yesterday. It wasn't some grand detective work. It was a stupid, mundane mistake. She left her iPad logged into her cloud account while she was at the hospital. A notification popped up. It wasn't from a coworker. It was a bank alert for a $5,000 wire transfer to a name I didn't recognize. My heart didn't just sink. It felt like it turned into lead. I opened the messages. I wasn't just being cheated on, I was being bankrolled. She wasn't at the hospital, she was at a luxury resort 3 towns over, and I was the one who packed her work lunch.
I didn't want to look. Every fiber of my being told me to just turn the iPad off, go to the kitchen, and finish the stew I was making for Leo and Bento. But curiosity is a cruel thing. I tapped the notification. It didn't just open a message. It opened a portal into a life I didn't recognize. The recipient's name was Julian. I scrolled up, and the air left the room. It wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown parallel universe. There were photos of them in places I'd always wanted to take her. Seaside cafes with pastel shutters, mountain trails we'd planned to hike together. But the kicker? The captions. So glad my husband is working late so I can finally be with my real soulmate, she'd texted him. Then came the financial part. I started digging through the PDF attachments of bank statements she'd accidentally synced. Our farmhouse fund, the money I'd saved from my architectural commissions and her overtime, was bleeding out. $2,000 for a designer watch, $4,000 for a business loan for Julian. She wasn't just giving him her heart, she was giving him our future. The sensory details of that moment are burned into my brain. The smell of the rosemary in the stew, the sound of Bento's claws clicking on the hardwood floor as he wagged his tail expecting a treat. It felt so normal, yet everything was rotting. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. Elena, ID E01, walked in, looking exhausted in her scrubs. She looked at me, then at the iPad in my shaking hands. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was deafening. "Kaito, I can explain." Her voice, usually so comforting, sounded like grinding glass.
Explain what, Elena? My voice was a whisper, but it felt like a shout in that small hallway. I held up the iPad. The screen was still glowing with the wire transfer confirmation. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just stood there,
the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounding like a countdown to an explosion. Then the excuses started. It was like watching a scripted play. First it was burnout. She claimed she was lost, and Julian was just someone who listened when I was too busy working on our future. Then the narrative shifted. She actually tried to tell me that the money, our money, was an investment so we could move into the farmhouse sooner. He was going to flip that business and triple our savings, Kaito. I did it for us, she pleaded, taking a step toward me. The audacity of it made my skin crawl. The sensory detail that sticks with me, the sound of her jewelry clinking, a gold bracelet I'd never seen before, likely bought with the money meant for our future kitchen. Suddenly, Leo, ID L01, walked into the room, rubbing his eyes. "Is Mommy home?" he asked sleepily. The shift in her face was terrifying. She went from desperate liar to doting mother in a heartbeat, reaching out to him. I stepped between them. I couldn't let her touch him with the same hands that had been typing those messages to Julian an hour ago. "Don't," I said. It was the hardest word I've ever spoken. She snapped. The sweet Elena disappeared, and for a second I saw the person who had been systematically dismantling our life. "You were never enough, Kaito," she hissed, her voice low so Leo wouldn't hear. "You and your simple life. Julian lives. You just exist." That was the moment the man I used to be died. The suddenness of her cruelty was a physical blow. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just picked up my keys.
I drove until the gas light flickered, ending up at a roadside motel that smelled like stale tobacco and industrial cleaner. I'd grabbed Bento, ID B01, on the way out. He was the only thing in that house that didn't feel like a lie. The first few hours were a blur of white noise. I sat on the edge of the bed, the scratchy polyester floral bedspread digging into my skin, and just stared at the wall. My phone was blowing up. Messages from Elena, first apologizing, then blaming me again, then begging me to come home because Leo was crying. That was the hardest part, the collateral damage. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a demolition. Every memory we had felt like a retroactively poisoned well. That weekend trip to the coast, she was probably texting Julian the whole time. The dinner where we celebrated my promotion, she was likely thinking about the investment she'd made with my bonus. I felt a sudden crushing weight in my chest. It wasn't just anger, it was a profound sense of mourning. I was grieving a woman who never actually existed. The Elena I loved, the one who liked burnt toast and Ghibli marathons, was a character she played. The sensory details of that night are vivid. The hum of the vending machine outside, the cold rain tapping against the window, and the way Bento let out a small, worried whimper, sensing my heart rate spiking. I went through the stages of grief in a single night. By 4 a.m., the rage had burned out into a cold, hard clarity. I realized that the simple life she mocked was the only thing I actually wanted to protect. I wasn't the one who had lost everything. She was. She had traded a home for a temporary thrill and a con artist. I looked at the floor plans on my phone, the farmhouse we'd never build. I deleted the file. The morning sun hit the motel parking lot with a clarity that hurt my eyes. I didn't go back to the house to argue. I didn't go back to plead. I went back with a lawyer's number and a set of cardboard boxes. The resolution wasn't a grand explosion. It was a quiet, surgical removal. I found out Julian wasn't even a businessman. He was a professional grifter who disappeared the second Elena told him the farmhouse fund was frozen. She didn't just lose me, she lost the fantasy she traded me for. I took Leo and Bento. We moved to a small rental near the coast. Not the farmhouse I dreamed of,
but a place where the air smells like salt and the walls aren't built on lies. The sudden event that changed everything wasn't the affair. It was the moment I realized I was allowed to leave. Looking back, the biggest lesson I learned is that trust but verify isn't cynical, it's self-preservation. If the person you love makes you feel like you're crazy for noticing a shift in the wind, they're usually the one blowing the smoke. To anyone in a similar spot, the sensory details of the betrayal, the strange scents, the hushed phone calls, the coldness in the bed, those aren't accidents. They are sirens. Don't ignore them because you're afraid of the fire. The farmhouse plans are gone, but for the first time in years, the house I'm in finally feels like a home. It's quiet, it's simple, and it's honest.